The forest had gone silent when she arrived. Not quiet, silent. Through frozen wilderness, a young woman traveled alone to a place marked by warnings and fear. She carried a pup, barely breathing, wrapped against her chest. She didn't know what lived behind the compound walls. She only knew these lives were fading, and something inside her refused to let them go. When the gates opened, she found herself surrounded by creatures whose grief had turned the very air heavy. And the alpha who emerged from the shadows, their protector, their king, stopped breathing when he saw what she held. Elise Winters never thought of herself as brave. She'd spent her life on the edges of the Montana wilderness, feeling too much of what others felt, carrying emotions that weren't her own. But 4 nights ago, she heard something beneath the storm, fragile cries almost swallowed by wind and snow. She found them half buried, 3 royal pups the world believed were lost forever. She saved them with nothing but stubbornness, sleepless nights, and a pull inside her chest she had no name for. Now, she stood inside Black Creek territory, facing wolves with human eyes, and a leader who looked at her like she was either salvation or danger. The air itself seemed to recognize her, even though she didn't understand why. They whispered a word she'd never heard before: Omega. She didn't know what it meant yet, only that the Syndicate was hunting these pups. The pack's grief had nearly destroyed them, and by walking through those gates, she had just become the one thing standing between survival and extinction. The alpha didn't move. Rowan stood in the center of the compound, snow collecting on his shoulders, eyes locked on the bundle in Elise's arms. Around him, the pack emerged from doorways and shadows, drawn by something they couldn't name, something that cut through the grief mist like a knife through silk. One of the pups whimpered, a tiny, living sound. The effect was immediate. A woman with silver streaking her dark hair gasped and staggered forward. A younger wolf, barely more than a boy, dropped to his knees in the snow. Others simply stopped breathing, caught between disbelief and a hope so sharp it felt like pain. "That's not possible," someone whispered. Elise tightened her hold on the pup, instinct flaring as the pack closed in around her. She could feel their grief like a physical weight pressing against her chest, their shock rolling off them in waves that made her dizzy. Too much. Always too much. But she held her ground. "They were in the woods," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Buried under snow near the ridge. I heard them crying." Rowan finally moved, 3 slow steps forward, his gaze never leaving the small, bundled shape in her arms. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the hollowness of someone who'd been holding too much for too long. "The ridge," he repeated, his voice rough. "That's 5 miles from the den site." "6," the silver-haired woman corrected, moving to Rowan's side. Her eyes were wet. 6 miles through a blizzard. They couldn't have survived. But they did. Elise carefully pulled back the edge of the blanket, revealing the pup's face. Small, gray-furred, breathing. The compound erupted. Voices overlapped, some crying, some laughing, others demanding answers Elise didn't have. The silver-haired woman reached out, then hesitated, her hand trembling in the air between them. Someone shouted about calling the council. Another voice rose above the chaos, sharp with suspicion. How did a human find them when we couldn't? The word human landed like an accusation. Rowan's head snapped toward the speaker, and the temperature seemed to drop. Enough. Silence crashed down again, but this time it vibrated with tension instead of grief. He turned back to Elise, and she saw it then, the war happening behind his eyes, hope and suspicion, relief and fear. He was their alpha, and she just walked into his territory carrying either a miracle or a threat, and he couldn't tell which. "Where are the others?" he asked quietly. "Safe," Elise said, "hidden until I knew." "Knew what?" "That you wouldn't take them from me." Something shifted in Rowan's expression. Recognition, maybe, or respect. He extended his hand not toward the pup, but toward her. "You have my word," he said, "on my life and this pack's honor. Bring them home." The elder's name was Vera, and she hadn't spoken since Elise returned with the other two pups. She'd simply watched from the doorway of the main hall, her weathered face unreadable, while the pack fussed over the reunited litter. The pups were feeding now, bundled together in a nest of blankets near the fire, and the compound hummed with an energy that felt almost like joy. Almost. Because Vera was still staring at Elise with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're making her nervous," Rowan said quietly, moving to stand between them. "Good." Vera's voice was like gravel and smoke. She stepped forward, circling Elise the way a wolf might circle something it couldn't quite classify. "I told you," Elise said. "I heard them crying. 6 miles away, through a blizzard, in the middle of the night." Vera stopped directly in front of her. "No human hearing is that good. I've always been sensitive." "To what?" Vera leaned in, breathing deep, and her eyes widened. "Oh." The single syllable fell like a stone into water. Rowan tensed. "Vera?" "It's been 60 years, the elder whispered, still staring at Elise. 60 years since I've caught this scent." She turned to Rowan, and something ancient flickered across her face. "She's Omega." The word rippled through the room. Wolves stopped mid-conversation. The silver-haired woman from earlier, Rowan's second, Elise had learned, looked up sharply from where she knelt beside the pups. "That's impossible," someone said. "Human Omegas are extinct." "Clearly not." Vera's gaze never left Elise. "The question is whether she knows what she is." Elise's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The way you feel everything," Vera said softly. "The emotions that aren't yours. The exhaustion from being around people. The need to disappear into the woods where it's quiet." She tilted her head. "Tell me I'm wrong." Elise couldn't. Every word landed with the weight of truth. Rowan was looking at her differently now, not with suspicion, but with something closer to awe and fear. "An Omega can ground a pack," he said slowly, piecing it together, "stabilize our bonds, break through emotional storms we can't escape on our own." "Like the grief mist," his second breathed. "She walked straight through it," Vera smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because it doesn't affect her the way it affects us. She felt it, yes, but it couldn't trap her." Elise backed up a step, overwhelmed. I'm just human." "You're Omega," Rowan corrected quietly. He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for months. "And if Vera's right, then she's not just the one who saved the pups," Vera finished. "She's the one who can save us all." Rowan found her on the training grounds just after dawn, standing in the snow with her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold something in. "You didn't sleep," he said. "Neither did you." Elise didn't turn around. She could feel him approach, not just hear him, but feel him, the way she'd been feeling everyone since Vera's pronouncement, like the walls between her and the pack had dissolved overnight, leaving her raw and exposed. "It gets easier," Rowan said, stopping beside her. "Learning to filter." "Does it?" Her voice cracked. "Because right now, I can feel Marcus's anger from the south wing, and Kira's fear for the pups, and someone, I don't even know who, is so grief-stricken they can barely breathe. That's Lena. She lost her mate in the attack that killed the pup's mother." Elise closed her eyes. "How do you stand it?" "I'm Alpha. I was born into the bond." He paused. You weren't, and you've been carrying it alone your entire life without knowing what it was. She finally looked at him. His face was softer in the early light, less guarded. Can you teach me? That's why I'm here. He moved to stand in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. The bond isn't just about feeling, he said. It's about choosing what you do with what you feel. Right now, you're a river with no banks. Everything flows through you with nothing to stop it. So how do I build banks? You don't. He raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he pressed his palm flat against her chest, just above her heart. Now, you, he said quietly. Push back, just a little. Let me feel you. Elise didn't know how, but her body did. Something warm unfurled in her chest, instinct older than thought, and she felt it flow from her into him. Rowan sucked in a sharp breath. His hand trembled against her sternum. "What is that?" she whispered. "Calm." His voice was rough with wonder. "I haven't felt genuine calm in 3 months." Around them, the compound was waking up, and Elise realized she could sense them all now, not as a chaotic flood, but as individual threads in a tapestry. Marcus's anger was settling. Kira's fear was easing. Even Lena's grief had softened at the edges. "They feel it too," Rowan said. "What you're doing right now, you're stabilizing us." Elise looked down at his hand, still pressed above her heart. "I don't know how to stop." "Then don't," he said simply. "This is what Omega means. You're the center that holds us together." Elise was checking on the pups when she saw the lights. 3 days had passed since Rowan's lesson, and she'd fallen into an uneasy rhythm. Mornings with the pups, afternoons learning to manage the bond, nights trying not to feel the weight of an entire pack's hope pressing against her shoulders. The pups were thriving. They tumbled over each other near the fireplace, play-fighting with tiny growls that made her chest ache with something dangerously close to love. She was adjusting their blankets when movement outside the window caught her eye. Blue-white lights, dancing through the trees. Too steady for lightning, too deliberate for stars. Her stomach dropped. She found Rowan in the strategy room, bent over maps with his second-in-command. He looked up when she entered, and whatever she saw in her face made him straighten immediately. "What's wrong?" "Lights," she said, "in the forest, moving in a grid pattern." The second Kira went still. "How many?" "3, maybe 4." Elise moved to the window, pointing. "There, and there." Rowan's jaw tightened. He turned to Kira. "Get Marcus and Vera, now." Kira vanished through the doorway. Rowan crossed to Elise, his hand finding her shoulder, grounding, steadying. Through the bond, she felt his fear, controlled but razor sharp. "Drones," he said quietly. "The Syndicate uses them to track." "Track what?" "Anything valuable, rare genetics, endangered bloodlines." His fingers tightened. "Royal pups with heat signatures that don't match any registered pack." The words hit like ice water. "They're looking for them." "They've been looking since the attack. We thought we'd covered our tracks, but..." He stopped, realization dawning. "You brought them here. You left a trail." It wasn't an accusation, but Elise felt it like one anyway. "I didn't know." "I know." Rowan's voice was firm. "This isn't your fault." But it felt like it was. She'd saved them only to lead their hunters straight to the compound's door. Marcus appeared in the doorway, Vera behind him. Both looked grimmer than Elise had ever seen them. "Perimeter?" Marcus asked. "Intact. But if they're using thermal imaging, they'll find the heat signature anomaly," Vera finished, moving to the window. She watched the lights for a long moment. 3 pups, abnormally warm, grouped together. That's what they're searching for. "How long do we have?" Elise asked. "Hours," Rowan said. "Maybe less. They'll map the area, identify the source, then they'll come." "With what?" Vera turned, and her expression made Elise's blood run cold. "Ultrasonic weapons, frequencies that incapacitate wolves but leave humans untouched." She looked at Elise with something like pity. "They've been hunting our kind for decades. They know exactly how to break us." Through the bond, Elise felt the pack's fear ignite like wildfire, spreading from room to room, wolf to wolf, feeding on itself. And she realized with terrible clarity, they weren't just afraid of the Syndicate, they were afraid they couldn't protect what they'd just gotten back. The sound started just before midnight. Elise couldn't hear it, not with her ears, but she felt it through the bond like a scream made of razors. Every wolf in the compound seized simultaneously, their collective agony slamming into her chest hard enough to drive her to her knees. Rowan collapsed beside her, hands pressed against his skull, teeth bared in silent anguish. Around them, the pack fell. Marcus hit the floor, convulsing. Kira crumpled against the wall, blood trickling from her nose. Even Vera, ancient, immovable Vera, dropped like her strings had been cut. The pups were shrieking. Elise forced herself upright, fighting against the phantom pain bleeding through the bond. Her legs shook but held. She stumbled toward the fireplace, where the pups writhed in their nest, crying with a frequency that tore at something primal inside her. "I've got you," she gasped, gathering them against her chest. Their tiny bodies trembled violently, and through her touch she felt their terror, pure and absolute. Outside, lights flooded the compound, engines rumbling, boots in snow. The Syndicate had arrived. Elise looked back at Rowan. He was still conscious, barely, his eyes finding hers across the room. Through the bond, she felt him fighting to speak, to move, to do anything but lie there helpless while his pack suffered around him. She felt his rage, his shame, his desperate need to protect. And underneath it all, trust. He was trusting her to do what he couldn't. Elise moved to the window, Pups clutched tight, and looked out at the enemy. 6 vehicles surrounded the compound, mounted with devices that pulsed with blue light. Men in tactical gear moved between them, weapons drawn, faces obscured by masks. One stood apart from the others, tall, unhurried. He raised a megaphone. "We know you have them, the royal bloodline. 3 pups with genetic markers worth more than this entire territory." A pause. "Send them out and we'll leave the rest of you alive." Behind Elise, Rowan made a sound like a wounded animal. She felt his fury spike through the bond, felt every conscious wolf in the compound trying and failing to rise. The man with the megaphone checked his watch. "You have 60 seconds, then we increase the frequency and come in ourselves." Elise's hands tightened around the pups. Her mind raced, sorting through fragments of everything Vera had told her about Omegas, everything Rowan had taught her about the bond. "You're the center that holds us together. But what if she could be more than that? What if she could be their shield?" She closed her eyes and reached deep into that warm, ancient thing unfurling in her chest. The instinct that had called her to the pups in the first place, that had let her walk through the grief mist untouched. And she pushed. Not calm this time. Protection. The pendant burned against her chest. Elise had worn it for years without thinking, a silver disc her grandmother pressed into her palm the week before she died, whispering words Elise had been too young to understand. For when you need to be stronger than you are. Now, with protection surging through her veins and the pups whimpering against her heart, the metal grew hot enough to make her gasp. She fumbled with her collar, pulling the chain free. The pendant caught the firelight. Simple, unadorned silver etched with symbols she'd always assumed were decorative. But as her Omega energy pulsed outward, the symbols began to glow. Vera's voice cut through the chaos, raw with pain, but urgent. "Where did you get that?" Elise looked down at the elder, still pinned to the floor by the ultrasonic assault. "My grandmother, your grandmother, was Omega." Vera's eyes were wide, almost fevered. "That's a focusing stone. Ancient, rare." She coughed, blood flecking her lips. "It takes what you are and makes it more." Outside, the megaphone crackled again. 30 seconds. Elise's fingers closed around the pendant. The moment her skin made full contact, everything sharpened. The bond, which had been like looking through fog, suddenly crystallized into perfect clarity. She could feel every wolf in the compound, not just their pain, but the exact frequency causing it, the way it vibrated through their skulls and spines. And she could feel the space between them and the attack, a gap she could fill. "What do I do?" she whispered. Rowan dragged himself onto his elbows, his voice barely more than a rasp. "What you've been doing, but bigger." "I don't know how." "You do." His eyes locked onto hers, fierce despite the agony. "Your grandmother made sure of it." The pendant pulsed in her grip, warm and alive. Through it, she felt an echo of someone else, a woman with Elise's eyes and hands that had worn this silver smooth, a woman who'd stood between her pack and danger, who'd understood what Omega truly meant. Not just the one who holds them together, the one who stands in front. Outside, engines revved, boots moved closer. "Time's up," the voice announced. "Increase frequency to level 4. Prepare to breach." The ultrasonic assault intensified. Wolves screamed. Kira began convulsing. Even Rowan's eyes rolled back, his body going rigid. Elise made her choice. She lifted the pendant over her head and pressed it flat against her sternum with both hands, Pups still cradled in the crook of her arm. She reached for that ancient instinct, that warmth that had guided her through every impossible moment since she'd found 3 dying pups in the snow. And this time when she pushed, the pendant answered. Power flooded through her like lightning through a rod, amplified and focused and absolutely devastating. Her eyes flew open, blazing with light that had nothing to do with the fire. "Get behind me," she said, and walked toward the door. The cold hit her first, then the lights. Elise stepped through the compound gates with the pups bundled against her chest and the pendant blazing like a star beneath her palm. Snow fell in thick sheets, but she walked through it without hesitation, her dark cloak snapping in the wind. The Syndicate operatives raised their weapons. "Stand down," the leader barked, lowering his megaphone. Even through his mask, she could see his confusion. "You're human. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me." Elise's voice carried farther than it should have, resonant with something that made several operatives step back. "These pups concern me. This pack concerns me." "Then you're more foolish than we thought." He gestured, and 2 operatives moved forward. "Seize her and the—" Elise released the pulse. It wasn't sound, it wasn't light. It was something older than both, a wave of pure protective force that erupted from her center and rolled outward like a shock wave made of starlight. The effect was instantaneous. Every electronic device within 100 yards screamed and died. The ultrasonic emitters sparked and went dark. Vehicle displays shattered. Tactical lights exploded. The operatives' comm units shrieked feedback before cutting to static. But that was just the beginning. The pulse washed over the compound behind her, and Elise felt the wolves gasp in unison as their pain simply stopped. Not dulled, not managed, erased. The ultrasonic damage that had been shredding their minds was smoothed away, replaced by a calm so profound it felt like diving into still water. Through the bond, she felt Rowan rise, felt Marcus's rage transform from agony into purpose, felt Vera laugh, actually laugh, with something like wonder. The Syndicate leader staggered, his hand going to his head. Around him, his operatives dropped to their knees, overwhelmed by an empathy they'd never been forced to feel before. Elise could sense their emotions cracking open. Fear, yes, but underneath it, shame, doubt, the terrible weight of what they'd been willing to do for money. "What are you?" the leader gasped. "I'm the reason you're leaving." Elise took another step forward and the pendant flared brighter. "I'm the reason you're never coming back." Behind her, wolves emerged from the compound, not attacking, they didn't need to. They simply stood, dozens of them, their eyes reflecting the light of her pulse. Rowan moved to her side, his presence a wall of alpha authority. "You heard her." The leader looked between Elise and the pack, his tactical advantage crumbling around him like ash. His weapons were dead, his men were broken, and the girl he'd dismissed as human was radiating enough power to rewrite the nervous system of everything within reach. He raised his hands slowly. "Fall back," he ordered. "Everyone fall back." The operatives retreated to their vehicles, pushing the dead machinery by hand, desperate to escape the reach of her light. Elise stood in the snow and watched them disappear into the forest. The pups had stopped crying. Elise's legs gave out the moment the last vehicle disappeared from view. She felt Rowan catch her before she hit the snow, his arms solid and warm as the pendant's light finally died against her chest. The pups tumbled from her grip into his, mewling softly, and she tried to tell him they needed to be fed, needed to be warm, needed sleep, he murmured, and the bond wrapped around her like a blanket. We've got them. We've got you. The world went soft and dark. She woke to sunlight and the sensation of being watched. Her body felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry, muscles aching, head foggy, mouth desert dry. But the bond hummed steady and calm beneath her ribs, carrying none of the panic that should have greeted consciousness after what she'd done. Elise opened her eyes. 3 wolf pups sat at the foot of her bed, arranged like sentries. They'd grown in the days she'd been unconscious, fuller, healthier, their gray fur sleek and their eyes bright with intelligence beyond their weeks. The moment she stirred, all 3 heads swiveled toward her in perfect synchronization. The largest one, a female Elise somehow knew, made a sound between a chirp and a growl. "I'm okay," Elise whispered, and was startled when her voice came out hoarse. The door opened. Kira entered carrying a tray, then stopped short when she saw Elise awake. Relief flooded through the bond so intensely it made Elise's eyes sting. 3 days, Kira said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "You've been out for 3 days. Rowan's been—" She stopped, smiled. "I'll let him tell you himself." She was gone before Elise could ask questions, and moments later, Rowan filled the doorway. He looked different than she remembered, less burdened somehow. The exhaustion that had carved lines into his face had eased, replaced by something that made her chest tighten. "You're awake." He crossed to her in 3 strides, dropping to his knees beside the bed so their eyes were level. Through the bond, she felt his relief, his awe, his... She looked away, overwhelmed. "The pups wouldn't leave," he said quietly, nodding toward the 3 guardians at her feet. "We tried moving them back to their nest. They howled until we brought them here." "They know," Vera's voice came from the hallway. The elder appeared behind Rowan, leaning on a carved walking stick, but otherwise whole. "They know you're their Omega, that you stood between them and death." Elise reached out tentatively, and the largest pup immediately padded forward to press her head into her palm. The touch sent warmth spiraling through her chest, not just affection, but recognition, bond. "The Syndicate?" Elise asked. "Gone," Rowan said, "and they won't be back. Word's already spreading about what happened here, about you. What I did was save us." His hand found hers, careful and deliberate. "All of us." The ceremony took place under a moonless sky. Elise stood at the center of the compound, the 3 pups circling her feet like living guardians. The entire pack had gathered, wolves in human form arranged in concentric circles, their eyes reflecting firelight from the torches planted in the snow. She wore her grandmother's pendant openly now, silver gleaming against the dark fabric of a cloak Vera had given her. The elder had woven protective symbols into the hem, ancient marks that predated the written word. "You've asked to be recognized," Vera's voice carried across the assembled pack. She stood with the council, 5 elder wolves whose combined age measured in centuries, "to formally accept the bond and the duties of Omega." "I have," Elise said. Her voice didn't shake. "You understand what this means," another council member spoke, an old man with scars crossing his weathered face. "An Omega doesn't simply join a pack. An Omega becomes its foundation, its heart." "I understand. You'll feel everything we feel," the scarred elder continued. "Our joy and our suffering, our victories and our grief. You'll carry weight no human was meant to carry." Elise thought of the 3 days she'd spent unconscious, her body learning to process what she'd done. Thought of the months ahead, the years, the lifetime of standing between her pack and the darkness that would inevitably come for them again. She thought of the alternative, walking away, returning to her cabin, living alone with only echoes of other people's emotions for company. No contest. "I understand," she repeated, "and I accept." Rowan stepped forward from where he'd been standing with the pack. He'd been silent throughout the ceremony, but through the bond she'd felt his steady presence like an anchor. Now he moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "As Alpha of Black Creek," he said, his voice formal but warm, I accept Elise Winters as Omega, as the one who stands at the center, as the one who brought our future home." He reached up and unwound a silver cord from his wrist, the mark of Alpha, worn since his ascension. With careful deliberation, he braided it into her blonde hair alongside the leather tie that held it back. The moment the silver touched her, the bond sang. Every wolf in the circle felt it, the click of something falling into place, a missing piece sliding home. The pack's collective consciousness, which had been fractured and struggling since the attack, suddenly stabilized, centered, whole. Elise gasped as the full weight of the bond settled into her bones, not crushing, but grounding. She could feel them all now, every member of Black Creek, their hopes and fears and fierce protective love flowing through her like a river that finally knew its banks. "Welcome home, Omega," Vera said softly, and the pack howled their agreement to the stars.